Well, thank you very much for the invitation, and it's a real pleasure to speak with this group. Parliaments
Merci beaucoup pour cette.
Parliaments have a fault line between a division between the formal and the informal in terms of what they do, how they think about themselves, how they behave, and then how we broadcast them, and ultimately what you as interpreters do. So what do I mean by that? The divide is between, in terms of what parliaments are about, is between legislation, that's lawmaking, and scrutiny, and that's the examination of what governments are about. So there's a famous quote, which I hope I've got to hand. Yes, I have. It's supposed that Otto von Bismarck, the famous German politician of the 19th century, said, if you like laws and sausages, you should never watch either being made. And that's funny because watching a sausage being made and what it's made out of is pretty ghastly. Watching laws being made, by and large, is pretty boring. It's technical, it's word by word, it's got to be right in the last detail. So it doesn't, on the whole, make great television, though occasionally it does. I mean, at the moment we have a piece of legislation going through the Westminster Parliament about domestic abuse, and the testimony of female MPs is very, very powerful, and it is, it draws you in. You've got to watch it. But most legislation, most of the time, is no fun to watch at all. Whereas the scrutiny of what governments are doing, the questions that are posed to governments, can be very lively and very interesting. Now, that takes us on to how parliaments behave. If you want a boring parliament, then find one where no member of a party, especially not the ruling party, dares to criticise their own leadership, their own party. There are plenty of parliaments in all parts of the world that behave like that. If you want a lively parliament, you want one where the leadership of each party, and especially the governing party, is nervous about what the people behind them are doing and what they're saying, because they're a bit under threat from them and not just the opposition. And that's certainly the case here in Westminster. And there is a really big divide between the way in which they behave, between parliaments that are based on a written style and those that are based on an oral style. So by which I mean, in many places, in many places, the politicians write their speeches or have them written for them and then read them out. And that's called reading into the record. And the purpose of making a speech is to get your words down on the written record of Parliament. And I can't think of anything more boring than that. Dull as anything to watch, no passion, no emotion, and very often the politicians leave somebody else, as I said, to write it for them. I'm afraid that's often the case in Washington, where speeches are written in order to be read into the record. Now, by contrast, there are parliaments where that's hugely discouraged. In fact, here in Westminster, it is against the rules to write your speech. You have to speak it and think on your feet and take interruptions, to take interventions from other people, which may not help your speech at all. And so people have developed a style which is based on maybe having a few notes. I've got 5 words written down in front of me. So I've got notes, rather than the practice of getting up a speech, sticking it in front of your face and just ploughing on for dear life and reading your way through to the end of it. So there's the contrast between the written and the oral style. And then if you think about how then the broadcasters deal with that, there are, again, two approaches, a very rigid one or much more flexible. Now, the rigid one, again, I'll take the example from Congress, from Washington. There they have stuck with the original rules that were written around broadcasting, which were written by very nervous people. They were nervous because they thought that if they showed lots of reaction shots, lots of people listening, who knows what the audience would see. So they're very, very constrained, and really what they see is the person who is speaking, and that's it. So it's a single shot, a shot no more interesting than the picture you can see of me now. No wide shot, no reactions, nothing. Like as though I was making a speech in a photo booth where you get your passport photo taken. Now, by contrast, lots of parliaments, and thankfully including this one, allow a great variety of shots so that you can see the reactions of the people around and you feel like you're there. So it's like much more like a normal television outside broadcast. So a huge contrast there in styles. So we talked about the difference in style between of purpose between legislation and scrutiny, of conduct between the written style and the oral style, and broadcasting between rigidity and flexibility. And lastly, and I'll wrap up now, your work as interpreters. Clearly, your work is, the first purpose is to be accurate. You're not creating a formal written record, a legal record of the proceedings. But if you go much wrong, then people will be upset with you. So the question then is, what do you do with the different styles of expression of the politicians? And the best example of this, of course, is the European Parliament, where so many different national styles are present in the same place. So we can have the very strange experience of watching an Italian politician really going for it. All the arms are up and around, and huge expression in the voice and face. And sometimes you hear the interpreter catching that with animation. I think mainly it's pretty deadpan, it's pretty controlled, and contrasts dramatically with the expression of the interpreter. But I'm interested, I think the question in the poll was exploring with you whether those of you who've got experience of translating parliaments are ever encouraged to bring some animation or expression to it, or really whether you are expected to be as controlled and as careful as possible. So I hope that was an interesting introduction to the differences between the way parliaments behave and how they think of themselves, and the impact it might have on you. And I'll stop there. Thank you.